Major funding for KPBS Evening Edition has been made possible in part by Anderson Plumbing, Heating and Air, proud to support the mission of KPBS and privileged to serve San Diego clients. Anderson Plumbing, Heating and Air, helping homeowners maintain drain, heating, and cooling systems since 1978. And by the Conrad Prebys Foundation, Darlene Marco Shiley, and by the following. And by viewers like you. Thank you.
Good evening. It's Friday, July 31st. Thanks for joining us. I'm Maya Trabulsi, and we begin with breaking news. Camp Pendleton officials releasing new information involving a deadly training accident off our coast. One Marine confirmed dead, 2 hospitalized, 8 others, service members, still missing at sea. KPBS military reporter Steve Walsh reports on the search and rescue efforts underway.
15 Marines and 1 sailor were on board their small craft when it began taking on water around 5:45 p.m. Thursday off the coast of San Clemente Island. 7 of those troops were recovered along with the body of a dead Marine. Lieutenant General Joseph Osterman, commanding general of the 1st MEF, says they're still searching for the remaining 8, though the ship sank quickly.
We know precisely where it went down because the other units were literally right there with it. So they marked it, they know exactly where it is. Part of the search and rescue effort includes things like looking at the water currents, looking at the temperature of the water, the survivability of people in the water.
Amphibious assault vehicles, or AAVs, are one of the oldest crafts in the Marines' arsenal, debuting in 1972. Designed to carry Marines on land and sea, while in the water, the 26-ton AAVs ride just over the wave tops, with their rear hatch sealed, says retired Marine Lieutenant Colonel Dakota Wood.
So you would have to go out through the top components that can open up. The crew would have to open those things up in order to get out, and you've got to scramble with people and all of your gear and the equipment that you've been carrying with you. And again, it gets very, very congested very quickly.
AAVs have been scheduled to be replaced as far back as the 1990s. They have a checkered safety record. A Marine instructor drowned inside an AAV near Del Mar in 2011. 14 Marines were injured, some severely burned, when their AAV struck a gas line at Pendleton in 2017. The Commandant of the Marine Corps, General David Berger, ordered a temporary halt until the cause of the accident could be found.
I've directed an immediate suspension of amphibious assault vehicle water operations until the causal factors of this mishap are better understood.
The AAV sank in several hundred feet of water, according to the Marines, below the range of divers. The name of the Marine who died is being held pending notification of the family. Steve Walsh, KPBS News.
Now for the latest on the pandemic. Today, California reported the state's first death of a child from coronavirus, a teenager in the Central Valley who had other health conditions. In our county, 3 more people died and 380 new cases were reported. 13 new outbreaks were also identified. Today, Dr. Anthony Fauci testified before a House subcommittee. He spoke about why Europe has been more successful in stopping the virus's spread.
When they shut down to the tune of about 95%, getting their baseline down to tens or hundreds of cases per day. So whereas when we did it, we got it down, but unfortunately, our baseline was 20,000 a day. I think there was such a diversity of response in this country from different states that we really did not have a unified bringing everything down.
Dr. Fauci reiterated his optimism about a vaccine in 2021, but added that not everyone will be able to get it right away. The new school year at San Diego Unified School District will start the same way the last one ended, online. KPBS education reporter Joe Hong has the latest details on what the typical school day will look like.
San Diego Unified's distance learning plan boils down to one word: flexibility. But that doesn't mean students won't be held accountable.
What we're trying to do is construct somewhat close to a normal school day.
Richard Barrera is the vice president of San Diego Unified School Board. He said that while teachers will take attendance and give lessons and grades, they'll also cater to the needs of individual students who might need more flexible schedules because they're sharing rooms, devices, or internet bandwidth.
It's all supposed to be tailored to the individual needs of students. That's how we teach, in a normal school day. And so trying to replicate that as closely as we can, in the virtual setting is exactly what we're trying to do.
Under the district's new plan, the typical school day will be 6 hours long. 3 hours will be live instruction where teachers will be on video in front of their students. 2 hours will be for independent learning. And 1 hour will be dedicated to office hours where students will get more individual attention from teachers.
What we're trying to do is provide so that there's time during the 6-hour day for students to be able to get a lot of their work done.
Despite his confidence in the distance learning plan, Barrera said the virtual classroom could never replace the in-person experience for students.
We can do the best that we can, through the online setting, to identify needs of students. But when students come back to campus, we're gonna see a lot of social emotional issues that have been building up over the past several months.
Barrera said the district is currently working with UC San Diego researchers to develop a plan and time frame for reopening physical schools. An update on those plans will be released on August 10th. Joe Hong, KPBS News.
The $600 unemployment benefit that has kept millions of Americans afloat officially expires at midnight. White House Chief of Staff Mark Meadows accused Democrats of refusing to negotiate. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi said a short-term extension only makes sense if the two sides are close to a deal on a relief bill. Meanwhile, rent is due tomorrow, but many people may not be able to pay it. Local and statewide moratoriums have kept a wave of possible evictions on hold for months now. But as KPBS reporter Max Rivlin-Nadler tells us, the clock is ticking.
The scale of the crisis is staggering. According to a study by the consulting firm Stout, over 40% of California's renters are currently unable to pay their full rent and are at risk of eviction. In San Diego, with its already elevated rents and lack of affordable housing, the issue looks very much the same. Tenants like Imperial Beach resident Patricia Mendoza suddenly saw their income zeroed out. She was laid off in April and didn't get her first unemployment benefits until June. She hasn't paid her rent in months.
It's extremely hard because, like I said, I'm the only one here. I'm supposed to keep my children safe, and how am I supposed to do that when we're about to get evicted, when these moratoriums lift?
She's waiting for some plan to come together to help tenants deal with their months of unpaid rent, at a time when the economy has no prospect of recovery soon, and low-income communities are being hit the hardest by the pandemic.
Help us low-income communities. Help our Black and brown brothers and sisters, because we need this help right now. Who else can we go to? Our elected officials. They're supposed to do something right. They're supposed to listen to us.
Right now, the region has several overlapping moratoriums placed on possible evictions, but many of them have already expired or are set to expire within weeks. The most pressing date for San Diego residents is now August 14th, when the state's Judicial Council could reopen eviction proceedings across the county in places without an ongoing moratorium. That means lawmakers at the local, state, and national level have 2 weeks to come up with some solution. The San Diego City Council voted in June to spend $15.1 million of federal CARES Act money to create an emergency rental assistance program, which would help around 3,500 families pay their rent. But that doesn't come close to filling the financial obligations of San Diego's renters.
It's going to take government dollars, I believe, whether it's local, city, county, or state dollars to help this crisis. This is no different than the COVID-19. It's a crisis that could explode all at once, all over us.
With unemployment benefits now cut nationwide, San Diego's tenants and landlords have pinned their hopes on Sacramento. Bay Area Assemblymember David Chu is the author of Assembly Bill 1436. It would allow renters in financial distress to stretch out their rent payments accrued during the pandemic until April 2022, and possibly beyond. It would also make it so unpaid rent during the pandemic can't be the sole basis for an eviction.
We all know that it is completely unreasonable to suggest that if you have been out of work or have seen your income drop dramatically, that come August 14th, you're magically going to have the money to pay any unpaid back rent in the last couple of months.
The bill also includes mortgage forbearance provisions for landlords. Last week, a group of landlords held a press conference in support of AB 1436. One of those was San Diego landlord Ginger Heitzke, who owns 449 units of housing across San Diego and Orange County. She doesn't want this housing crisis to be a repeat of 2008, where investors were able to move into a distressed housing market, buy foreclosed properties, and drive up rents.
I feel like I'm looking at this thing from the perspective as a real estate professional, and it terrifies me. Because, renters, particularly, renters on the lower scale of income, they just are in the habit of being in the business of just being people. They're not real estate professionals.
But not all landlords are quite on board with the bill. Todd Henderson is a fourth-generation San Diego landlord. He says that without more financial support, bills like AB 1436 are just kicking the can down the road and could leave tenants with an insurmountable amount owed to landlords.
Individuals who really are in those positions, frankly, are probably going to pack up and leave in the middle of the night and leave. And that does happen. We have that happen on a somewhat regular basis.
With the clock ticking, it's now up to state legislators and Governor Gavin Newsom to craft a response to the looming eviction cliff that many other cities across America are now falling off of. Tenants like Patricia Mendoza are counting on it.
When we see Governor Newsom say we're in this together, we just want to be accounted for. That's it. Want to be in it together, that's it.
Max Rivlin-Adler, KPBS News.
The investigation into the death of Army Specialist Vanessa Guillen has sparked veterans around the country to tell their story of military sexual trauma. Here's KPBS military reporter Steve Walsh.
The publicity surrounding the death of Fort Hood soldier Vanessa Guillen has turned into a national movement. After the soldier went missing April 22nd, her family says she had been afraid to report sexual harassment. Her story has opened up the floodgates for others in the military. Catherine Allard is a professor of psychology at Alliant International University.
How we respond to people disclosing sexual assault, be it in the military or not, it really makes a difference in terms of outcomes for them.
She says the most important thing to do is believe people. An Army team dispatched to Fort Hood found nearly a third of the women they survey reported being sexually harassed. There are many reasons why sexual trauma goes unreported in the military.
You're highly dependent on the institution itself. You cannot leave. You can't just I quit. You can't do that. And you're dependent on the resources they give you if you have to go to battle, etc.
Meaning you have to go through the chain of command and military investigators. That not only adds to the reluctance, but also the trauma, she says. Allard has counseled both women and men with military sexual trauma. She says veterans who have gone through these experiences may finally be having their moment. Guillen's death is inspiring protests in San Diego and around the country, some calling for sexual assault investigations to be taken out of the hands of the military.
They have their own police, their own sort of JAGs, and attorneys. And so there's been a push for a long time to have external investigations.
Guillen's family is in Washington today to support a bill that will allow service members to file complaints outside the chain of command. Steve Walsh, KPBS News.
A large coalition of environmental and recreational groups is challenging the Trump administration's changes to the National Environmental Policy Act. KPBS environment reporter Eric Anderson says the changes are official this week.
The president says one of the nation's most prominent environmental laws is being modernized and simplified. Now it affects lands like these in the Cleveland National Forest. The president says it's part of his push to eliminate government regulations.
We're here today to celebrate a historic breakthrough that will transform the lives of workers and families all across our nation. For decades, the single biggest obstacle to building a modern transportation system has been the mountains and mountains of bureaucratic red tape in Washington, D.C.
Critics say the changes mean there will be fewer environmental and public reviews on projects on federal lands, and they say that's devastating. More than 20 groups are suing, including the Western Environmental Law Center. Center for Biological Diversity, Earth Justice, and the National Parks Conservation Association. They say the changes need to be overturned.
These changes are so substantial that they really change the fundamental playing field and the legal framework under which federal agencies make decisions.
The center's Susan Jane Brown says the changes weaken environmental reviews and limit public input. She calls NEPA an important cornerstone of the nation's best environmental laws.
We talk about the National Environmental Policy Act as the Magna Carta of American environmental law. And it really was. It was a sea change. It was promulgated in 1979. And so it had the benefit of the 1960s and the 1970s, where we had a growing awareness of the environmental and social justice issues associated with federal actions.
The lawsuit was filed in a federal court in the Northern District of California. There is no request for an injunction to stop the changes until a ruling is issued. Eric Anderson, KPBS News.
It's been a hot time across the board and bright as well. That marine layer, those morning clouds that we often see in the morning hours near the coast, well, they really weren't that existent in many areas of Southern California. They have stayed offshore over the past day or day and a half. So we expect to be dealing with a similar setup into tomorrow with fewer than normal morning coastal clouds. Near record warmth for some again today. We're going to see the heat begin to back off into Saturday and especially Sunday. Still hot Saturday. In fact, those excessive heat watches and warnings, I should say, excessive heat warnings and heat advisories will persist for Saturday. And then we'll take it down a notch into Sunday and Monday. We look forward to that. So coastal areas are not under the heat alerts, but the interior, places like El Cajon, Ramona, Escondido, Mount Laguna, and even mountainous areas below 5,000 feet are under heat advisories until 9 p.m. Saturday. Excessive heat warnings persist for the interior deserts, areas farther to the east, until the same time. So again, we expect to see fewer coastal clouds late tonight. We'll have a low of 88 in Borrego Springs, 67 Mount Laguna, 70 in El Cajon, and Chula Vista around 66. Tomorrow, pleasant near the coast, hot though inland, 117 degrees into Borrego Springs, Ramona up around 99, a hot Saturday. A look at the drought update, the drought monitor. Not many major problems for us. It's especially dry up to the far northern part of California, up near, say, Mount Shasta. Parts of the interior west are dry, but we're doing okay. It is a dry time of the year, obviously, so we're not too far from the norm here in Southern California. The weekend forecast, scorching heat, especially Saturday. Things begin to get a little more tolerable for the interior crowd and the inland crowd into Sunday. Coastal forecast 80 Saturday and Sunday, back to the mid-70s on Wednesday. Good deal of sunshine. Inland areas, 93 Saturday and Sunday, back into the low 80s by Wednesday. Mountains, very warm Saturday, 89, dropping into the mid-70s by Wednesday. And the deserts, 117 on Saturday, cooling down to 108 on Wednesday. I'm meteorologist Jeff Cornish for KPBS News.
The city of San Diego will soon negotiate a multi-billion-dollar deal with a utility to provide gas and electricity to residents for years to come. And while this may be a significant source of revenue for the city, some say city leaders may be giving away too much. Earlier, I spoke with KPBS science and technology reporter Shalina Chatlani, who is covering this story. Shalina, thanks for joining me today. Let's start with some background, if you don't mind. What is this franchise deal?
Sure. So for a little history, you might have wondered, why SDG&E is our main service provider here? Well, 50 years ago, the city of San Diego and San Diego Gas and Electric signed a contract, and that contract gave SDG&E something called right of way. Essentially, it gives the utility the right to rip up the streets and do whatever they need to provide service, and provide service in a monopoly. That's called a franchise agreement. Back then, SDG&E paid only $50,000 for it, and of course a yearly tax. But now that contract will expire in January, and the city is trying to figure out how to do another one of these. It's essentially putting up the chance to service the city in a type of auction, and utilities can bid for this chance. The city right now is asking for a minimum bid of $62 million for a 20-year contract.
And in your feature, you report that community advocates say utilities should be required to pay more than $62 million?
Yeah, the reason why is because this franchise is estimated on the low end to give a utility about $6.4 billion in profits over 20 years. Advocates say residents should get that money back. So if you look at SEC filings, the utilities profits have doubled in the last decade, from around $360 million to over $700 million in profit last year. That's really good for a utility. And SDG&E charges some of the highest rates in the state. You can see that on this graph over here. Look at SDG&E compared to other utilities like PG&E and Southern California Edison. Here's one of those advocates, Matthew Vasilakis of the group Climate Action Campaign.
This is the first time in 50 years that we get to renegotiate this deal, and we really need to make sure that it's community-centered and community-focused, and unfortunately right now the mayor's plan is not. It is a sweetheart deal for SDG&E.
Matthew Vasilakis says, hey, here's an opportunity for the city to get a nice chunk of change that could go toward the community at a time when the city is already facing a budget crisis due to the coronavirus pandemic. But SDG&E says it doesn't even want to pay the $62 million. Remember, the utility is on track to earn potentially $1 billion in profits this year. Here's my interview with SDG&E executive Mitch Mitchell.
We are not opposed to paying a reasonable franchise fee. We paid $50,000 in 1970. If you do the calculation of time, value, inflation, and money, a reasonable fee is somewhere in the $1.5 million to $2 million range, and we think that's appropriate.
Wow, that's really interesting. So tell us, what does the city say?
Sure. So I asked Deputy Chief Operating Officer Eric Caldwell about this and why the city isn't asking for more.
If we set that number too high, it discourages competition. If we set it too low, it potentially sets the ability for the city to receive far less revenue in an upfront payment than we believe is reasonable.
I also spoke to Loretta Lynch. She's a former president for the California Public Utilities Commission and now works for an environmental advocacy group. She says being reasonable isn't really an issue because cities have lots of power, and the right to work with the city is a huge deal.
Basing what is a good deal on what happened in 1970 really shortchanges every single resident of San Diego and every single business.
Lynch says there's a lot of franchise agreements across the country, and now a lot of cities are figuring out how to approach them differently. Lynch says San Diego doesn't have to follow what it did in the past. In fact, community advocates say they would rather have a 5-year agreement with the utility as well.
So where are we at this deal right now? What can you tell us is coming next?
So on July 16th, the Environment Committee voted 3-1 to move forward with a consultant's report that lists that $62 million minimum bid recommendation. But a lot of community advocates feel like the vote happened really fast. And so does council member Barbara Bree, who's running for mayor. She was the only one on the committee who voted no. Bree says some of the reports were only released to the public a week before the meeting, and that's not really fair. The chair of the Environment Committee, however, Jen Campbell, says they were reviewing the reports for weeks. But now a local law firm has now threatened the city with a lawsuit to void the vote, saying the city violated open meeting laws for allegedly not meeting on the deal in public, which the public is entitled to hear about.
Shalina, thank you so much for that report, and we'll be following along with you. I've been speaking with KPBS science and technology reporter Shalina Chatlani. Thanks so much. The U.S. economy experienced its worst drop on record amid the pandemic lockdown. SDSU's Miro Kopik explains in this Friday Business Report.
It's a record drop. 32% decline in GDP growth is an astronomical number. It's the biggest drop since they've been keeping records. So we're in uncharted territory. 75% of that decline was personal consumption. One of the things that economists were looking to is whether this was going to be a V-shaped recovery, meaning that there is a big drop and then we're bouncing back. This is going to be highly doubtful because beginning in July, even though the state had kind of reopened during the month of June, after the 4th of July holiday, California and Texas and Florida all kind of slowed down their openings or even cut back on openings, and probably another 24 states did the same thing. So we're going to keep track on what's happening over the third quarter, but the first month of the third quarter being July is not letting this third quarter get off to a good start.
And you can find tonight's stories on our website, kpbs.org/evening edition. Thank you for joining us. I'm Maya Trabulsi, and we leave you now with Whitney Shea, the first featured musician of our KPBS Summer Music Series. Good night.
So many people walking a lonely road.
We recorded this song all sheltered in place during quarantine with musicians from the United Kingdom, Brazil, Austin, Texas, and here in San Diego, California. And it was just an incredible collaboration that we all came together in a really short time, in 2 weeks, and were able to record, mix, master, and make a video for this song. So this is all spearheaded by Adam J. Eros, and I'm so glad that I got to be a part of this project, and it's a really beautiful song.
Passing through this curtain without a hand to hold.
This project with You're Not Alone was just an important way for us to say thank you to all the essential workers that are out there on the front lines during this pandemic. It's a way for us musicians to come together and collaborate on a project and just really to bring people joy in this time, because if anything else, people really need something, entertainment, music, art, to look forward to during these dark times. So this is just our way to say thank you and bring joy to people.
Unlike the heroes, fighting a question they never asked.
You can watch this video and hear the full interview at kpbs.org/summer music series. Thanks so much, and stay safe out there. Keep the music alive.
Major funding for KPBS Evening Edition has been made possible in part by Anderson Plumbing, Heating and Air, proud to support the mission of KPBS and privileged to serve San Diego clients. Anderson Plumbing, Heating and Air, helping homeowners maintain drain, heating, and cooling systems since 1978. And by the Conrad Prebys Foundation, Darlene Marco Shiley, and by the following: and by viewers like you. Thank you.